everyone, thank you so much for joining us here in the community garden for this tutorial on container gardening. I hope that you will find it useful and that it will help you grow some of your own food right at home. Whether you have a large garden or you've gardened before or you've never gardened, container gardening is a great way to get started. And it's even great for those of you who are seasoned growers. So let's get started and look at what we need to begin our container garden. So why would we want to grow food in containers? There are several reasons. One of them is that it is really inexpensive. This is a large 20-inch pot that I got for under $10 at Home Depot. So it's a good amount of space and we can grow several vegetables in this pot, as we'll see later in the video. And it is going to hold about 2 bags of soil, so for under $30 really, we're going to be planting a small garden in this container. Another reason for container gardening is that it's very flexible. You can put your garden wherever you have a patch of sun, so you don't have to necessarily build a structure. You can watch the sun move over your lot at home and decide where those containers will find a great home and the plants will get a lot of sun, and you can place them there. These containers are also very lightweight, which is great. You can move them around fairly easily. If you'd like to get one of those rolling planter stands, that will make it even easier to move. You really shouldn't have to move it much after you put it in its sunny spot, but just in case, if you do have a level place and you think you might want to move your containers, or if at the end of the season it'll be easier for you to move your containers to empty them and refill them with fresh soil, you might think about getting one of the rolling plant stands to hold your large container. Another reason for container gardening is that it offers you a great deal of control over your garden. So you can find the best space for this garden. It might even be on top of a table on your back patio, or it could be near your driveway or on your front step. There are a lot of places that you can put your garden when it's this size. It also allows you to choose the soil that you use. So I know down here we have a lot of clay soil, which has great nutrients but can be very difficult for plants to grow in over time without some amending. So today we'll be using this large 20-inch pot, and we will be filling it with organic potting soil. This container is great for several reasons. One, I mentioned it was lightweight. I love the color of it. Red is one of my favorites, but there are a lot of options for you. So if you have a certain color that you love, it can add a lot of fun to your home and to your yard. So that's a great thing. You can choose different materials. I have chosen this lightweight plastic. It is durable, it lasts a very long time, and it is just lightweight. So for me, when I'm moving it, I tend to lift it by myself. It's usually just me, and so I want something where the container isn't going to weigh down the garden along with the soil. Another thing you want to watch for with containers is that they have drainage. This container has built-in drainage and a saucer at the bottom. I don't know if you can see the built-in saucer there. You can see that line. That is a built-in saucer, and the drainage, you always need drainage. You do not want your plants sitting in overly wet soil, so we need to have drainage in our containers. If you buy a container that you really love and it does not already have drainage, if it is made from a plastic material, you can easily drill holes in the bottom. Don't worry about losing soil. The holes can be really fairly large without soil leaking through the bottom of the pots. If you buy anything that is made of terracotta or another sort of ceramic material, please make sure there is drainage when you purchase it. Those materials can be very difficult to drill through and often crack. So just make sure you pay attention when you're purchasing your container that it does have drainage or will be able to have drainage in it once you get home.
When purchasing a container, look for drainage holes like these at the bottom.
Okay, now that you've chosen your container, it's time to choose soil. And hopefully you all found something from the recommended list that we handed out earlier. I like to use an organic potting soil. and I'm using the Kellogg version. There are several options at probably any store, so you choose what you like best. This size pot will need probably 3.5 to 4 cubic feet of soil. So that's about 2 bags of potting soil as it's packaged. It usually comes in packages of 1.5 to 2 cubic feet. So make sure you get a couple of packages per pot this size. Okay, if you've selected your container,
this is the Kellogg All Natural potting mix that I will be using in our planting today.
You should have supplies now to get started, so let's begin the process. Now that we've got our container filled almost to the top with some great organic soil, we can go ahead and start planting. Now, depending on the plant combinations that you've chosen, you're going to start with whatever seedlings you have. So those are the little baby plants, the seedlings. We'll start with those. If you're using any seeds in your combination, those will come after we put the seedlings in. Whatever combination you've chosen, if it is one of the recommended ones, I have some recommended plant spacing as well, and you'll see those pictures coming up soon. The basics of planting any container garden are that you need to know what your plants need. So you need to know what level of sun they need. Most of the things we're planting now are summer food, summer vegetables, and so they're going to need a full day's worth of sun. You'll want to know what kind of space they need. So in some of the recommended combinations, we have tomatoes, and those tomatoes are going to get very large. They're going to take up space up here. Peppers are a little bit smaller, so they're going to take up space in the mid-range. And then we have a lot of smaller plants like basil, we have lettuces, we have radishes, any sort of root vegetable like carrots. Those are going to take up the lower space. So we want combinations that are going to utilize different space within the container so that they're not fighting over the resource of sun and space. We'll begin with the pizza garden that was recommended. For this garden, I have all transplants. So I have a small tomato seedling here. I also have some sweet pepper seedlings. A little tip, I have actually 2 peppers in this container. I spied this at the store and grabbed it because I know I'm going to get 2 plants for the price of 1. So if you see things like this, definitely grab them. So I did get this sweet pepper plant, and I also got this pot of basil. Now, basil is a very quick growing herb. You could definitely start that from seed right now. It is almost mid-May, and so I would prefer to start, if I was starting a container today, with a seedling of tomatoes and peppers. They do take a long time to get to a good place where they're going to have a higher success rate. So those seedlings are the best options. Basil, I did find this beautiful potted basil, and so I went ahead and grabbed it, but I would not be opposed to starting this with seed. Okay, so we're ready to put our seedlings in for the pizza garden. I have this tomato seedling, which I am going to put at what I would call the back of the container. So I'm not going to put it in the middle because it is going to grow so tall that it is going to create some shade, and you're going to want to harvest the tomatoes as well. And so I just like to keep it toward one side of the container. We'll discuss later that we will need to give this tomato something to climb, or we want to be able to wrap it onto something, and so having it at the back of the container is a good idea. Now, I mentioned that I got this 2-for-1 pepper plant, this sweet pepper. I am going to put 2 pepper plants in this container, sort of on each side of the container, right in front of the tomato. You'll get a close-up look at this in a minute. If you want a couple of different types of peppers, you can just grab whatever you'd like. If you like some spicy and some sweet, this is your opportunity to grab one of each of those. But I would say 2 peppers in this container max. And then for the basil, I am going to go ahead and put this in the front of the container. and line that in the out of the way of the other plants. This container has several basil plants. I think we have 3 or more in here. It would be nice to start with seed. I would put several seeds in, and we can see an example of that later. But today I will likely separate these plants, which I will show you how to do, and line them at the front of the container. So with a seedling, we need to transplant the plant or move it from its little container into the large container that we're creating. It's really simple to do. Plants are much hardier than you think they are, so don't be scared of the plant. The main thing is that we want to support it during its move. So I'm going to hold on to the tag that was in here, and I'll put that in my container. If you want to create your own labels later on and make it more fun and decorative, you can do that. But for now, I'm going to hold on to this so that I don't forget what type of tomato I'm putting in. I chose a Cherokee Purple today, one of my favorites. I would say that cherry tomatoes are amazing in these containers. They're pickable, munchable, especially if you have little ones in your family. You can just pop those right off and have them as a fresh snack right there. All right, so the transplanting, what we want to do is we want to slide our fingers around the stem so that I'm not pinching it, I'm just ready to catch it. And then you're going to put your container upside down and squeeze around the bottom just to loosen the roots if you need to. This one was really loose and ready to come out. And here you'll see a really nice root system. We don't have any binding. If it was root bound, you would see a lot of white roots wrapped very tightly in this space, but this one looks great. So when I'm planting this, I'm going to turn it back right side up, of course, and here we're losing some soil already. So I don't need to loosen the roots much. They're doing that all by themselves. If I had some bound up roots, I would squish them a little bit and maybe even tear a few off the side to let the plant know that it can spread out into its new home. Now to put the plant in its new home, simply dig a hole. And again, this is the tomato, so it's going to go toward the back of the pot. And you're going to put your seedling right in there. If you have 2 hands, it's a little bit easier. I'm filming with one and showing you with the other. Now, tomatoes can be put in the container so that the soil reaches their bottom leaves. Everything on the stem of a tomato plant can become a larger root system. So it's like the stem of the tomato chooses what it wants to do and can just send out extra roots. So that's going to let our plant be a little bit stronger. So you can see once you get your plant into its new space, you really want to kind of push down, not terribly hard, but just enough to make sure there's no extra air space sitting around the roots of your plant. That air space can become space for water to sit in, and it leaves a bigger chance for root rot or bacteria to grow around the roots of your plant. So just push that soil down and tuck that plant in nicely so that it's going to stay in place and not be exposed to extra air and water space. Once you have your tomato in, it's time to add the peppers. And if you have more than 1 plant in a pot, we're going to go through the same sort of transplanting process, but we are going to separate these plants so that we can give them extra space in the container. So again, we want to be able to catch the plant as we remove it from the container. We'll flip it over, squeeze the bottom. Okay, here you can see some more developed root systems. We do have 2 plants in this container, so it means more roots. What we're going to do now is separate the plants. Again, don't worry too much about the plants. Plants are really strong. They look very little to us, but they've been growing a while, so they know what they're doing. To separate them, just simply turn them back over and gently pull them apart. And you can start to feel where the roots are stuck together. And here you'll see that I have a root system intact here and another one intact here. So I do have 2 whole plants with root systems, and they will grow independently, and they'll be much happier when they have their own space. I've placed the peppers basically where I'm going to want to plant them. You can see the tomato plant is at what I'm calling the back. And now I'm going to give the peppers their own space here on either side of the container. So again, you just need to create a space for that plant. Tuck the roots down in there. You want to make sure, again, that this plant is tucked in so that it is facing directly up. You don't want it kind of to the side or anything. It needs to see that sun. And now you can see this pepper looks larger than the tomato, but that tomato is going to take off now that it's in its new home. We've got one pepper in. We'll do the other here. And again, tuck it in nicely so that it is facing directly at the sun. I've taken the soil up to the bottom leaves of the pepper. The peppers do not grow extra root systems like the tomatoes do, but it's a nice sort of added stability for those little stems of these plants. So now we have the 3 larger plants in the container. Now on to the basil. There are several plants in this container. I see 3. So if you have basil that has multiple plants in the container, you can choose to separate them. Basil will be fine growing in a group like this, so it's totally up to you. I am going to go ahead and separate them. Again, holding on to the label and holding on to the plants, get ready to catch them. Great root system, not too bound up, looks very healthy. And I'm going to gently separate. We've got 1, 2, and 3 healthy basil plants, and we'll be putting those along the front of the container to round out our planting. Again, I like to space the plants in the container approximately where they're going to actually be planted, just so I know that I have enough space. If you were to have 5 or 6 basil plants, you might say, you know, those aren't going to fit. It's going to be too many, and you might just reserve those for a different planting. So these 3 I think will be lovely in here. And again, make sure they're tucked in and that soil is holding those plants so that they can look directly up at the sun. Oh, it smells great. Oh, basil, it smells like summer. And there we go. So this would be a full container. It is going to fill out nicely. Right now it might look a little bit small, but given about 30 days, you're going to see some large growth and it's going to be amazing. Well, if you have your container already planted and you're using all transplants, very simple. It doesn't take long, just a few minutes, and you've got a garden started that will be feeding you in short time. So very exciting. I did want to cover also starting the gardens with seeds. Now, if you have a combination of transplants and seeds, start with the transplanted plants. Again, I will show you where the plants should go in relation to the other plants and or seeds that you're planting in future photos here on this video. But we always want to start with the transplants, and we want to make sure we've smoothed out the rest of the soil after those transplants are in, because we don't want to create divots and pockets where seeds will sit in water either. So we want to make sure we have a nice smooth level soil so that we can plant our seeds, tuck them in, and make sure they're not divoted and some are getting watered and some are not getting watered as much. One of the recommended gardens that is extremely easy to start just with seeds is the salad garden. So for my salad garden, I have salad bowl lettuce seeds. I have French breakfast radish. It's one of my favorite radishes. It's very mild and it's really beautiful as well. So it's really fun to have in a salad. And I got the tender green burpless cucumbers. These are some of my favorite cucumbers. They're very large, the smooth skin, and they tend to have very soft, small seeds in the middle. So really tasty. But those are the 3 I've chosen. Now you can get whatever seeds you want. There are several websites that have more availability and more options than maybe the stores locally do have. So True Seed, SOW, True Seed is a great online resource if you're wanting to order seeds. But I did find these at my local Home Depot, and where I could, I bought organic seeds just because I think, when I can control everything, I do choose everything organic. It makes me feel better about feeding my family and putting it into my own body. Now, as with the seedlings, we need to know our plants, even though they're starting out as seeds. So I know that cucumbers are going to vine. They're going to want something to climb, so they're going to get tall, not unlike the tomatoes. The tomatoes don't necessarily vine and cling like the cucumbers will, but they are going to need space up top. I know that these lettuces are going to be very happy at a middle height, so they're not going to be stealing the sun from the cucumbers, and the cucumber stems stay very thin, so they don't need a lot of space at the level that the lettuces will need. Radishes are root vegetables, and so the most space they need is the underground space. They are going to be, right at the front of our container, the lettuces in the middle and the cucumbers at the back, so that they can climb. Now, you can try different ways to plant. If you want to put your cucumbers right in the middle of the container and have some sort of structure in the middle that they're going to climb, that's up to you. Go ahead and give it a shot. I just have my preferences, and we try different things all the time, and there are very few wrong answers and a whole lot of right ways to do it. Here we have cucumber seeds. When we're looking for how deep to plant our seeds, the general rule is to measure 3 seeds side by side and put your finger next to it, and that's about how deep you will plant each seed. So 3 times the width of your seed will give you the planting depth. I find this is a nice rule to use, especially when I'm planting with kids, because it shows them exactly how deep that should go. Now we can use the term first knuckle, or we could also say ½ inch, whatever is appropriate for the age. But it's also great just for anybody to realize that you can look at your seeds. You don't have to have a seed packet. I know that sometimes mine get faded, or there might not even be enough information on the back, but this will tell you how deep to plant each seed. This seed packet does say ½ inch for planting depth, which you can see is about the same as I've probably measured here with my finger. Here you can see our lettuce seeds. There's a great difference in the size from the cucumber seeds, and you can see I have 3 here, and that measures a lot smaller than the measurement was for our cucumbers, which means we'll be planting them pretty shallowly. The packet here says 1/4 inch deep. With lettuce seeds, I tend to put them almost on the top, just covering them with a thin layer of soil to protect them from wind, birds if I can, and to keep them in place while I'm watering them.
Now that we have our soil leveled, let's prepare the spaces for our seeds. I'm going to start by making space for the cucumber seeds around the back of the container. They'll need a little bit of space, about 4 to 6 inches apart. Now I'll make a couple of lines for lettuce seeds. I like to grow my lettuces kind of close together so that you have them growing sort of in bunches rather than just independent plants. This is an example of what the lettuces will look like when they're growing in this style. Now we just need spaces for our radishes. They'll need about 1.5 inches of space each. So you can see I'm spacing those out appropriately at the front of the container. Here you have your seed pattern all laid out. Now it's time to place our seeds. I like to put 1 seed per space because I don't like to go back and thin them later. If you'd like to add more than 1 per space, you can do so. When planting lettuces, I will sprinkle the seeds in very thinly. We don't want them too crowded, but I do want more than the packet would recommend. I like a nice thick bunch of lettuce. Last but not least are the radish seeds. These seeds are a great deal larger than the lettuce seeds, so they're much easier to plant, one per space. Now that we have all of our seeds in, it's time to gently cover them, pressing down to make sure that there is no extra space around your seed to hold water. If those spaces hold water around your seed, we risk rotting the seeds rather than helping the seeds to germinate and turn into plants. Once all of your seeds are covered, please add labels and go ahead and water.
Take a look at these drawings of plant spacing for the various recommended container gardens.
Again, these are just recommended spacings. If you have containers that are different shapes and sizes, or you just want to play with the spacing of your plants, feel free to do so.
If you've decided to plant things that were not on the recommended list, a great resource for you might be the book Square Foot Gardening. It's really simple, great pictures, very easy to understand, and will take you from building a structure or choosing a container that's the right size all the way through the whole spacing, planting, what likes to grow next to what, and all the way to harvesting and replanting. It's a beautiful book, well worth the little bit of money that it costs, and you can find that on Amazon, and it'll be there hopefully within a few days. So if you have chosen other plants, we can talk about that on our live session, or you can go ahead and use a different resource for the spacing guide. There you have it. Container gardening is so easy and so much fun. It's a great thing to do with your family. It's a great way to jump into gardening without too much commitment. And you can redo these containers seasonally. That's another great thing. Again, today we're planting summer plants, which means we're going to be eating the fruit of the plants. So tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, mostly things in the fall and the spring. We'll be eating roots and shoots. I know we did some of that today with the lettuce and the radishes. Those plants do okay in the heat, and so we can plant them now. They are also very quick growing, so the seeds from radishes can be harvested 28 days after planting from seed. So it's a pretty quick turnaround on that. And in the middle of the summer, if you want to plant more of those, you can do that, or you can choose to use your container for some other quick growing summer or fall plants. Well, hopefully you have your containers planted and you're very happy with them. And hopefully you've labeled them, especially the seeds. Make sure you put labels in with what you planted. I like to mark which types of seeds as well, so I don't just put cucumbers. I would write on there the tender green cucumber. Also put on your labels, if you're planting seeds, the date that you planted those seeds. Most seeds will show growth above soil or show germination or growth within 14 days. So if it's been more than 2 weeks and you planted some seeds and you haven't seen any leaves popping up from the soil, you may want to investigate and see if something is going on. Maybe animals have eaten your seeds. I know I have birds in my garden all the time, and I'm constantly replanting things like sunflowers, which are one of their favorites. And so I'm always checking to make sure I have things growing, and if they're not, I'm either replacing the seeds or I'm digging the soil a little bit to see if there's any growth underneath. And you know, seeds are inexpensive, and just go ahead and replant if there's a problem, if you notice that you're not getting any growth after about a couple of weeks. Now you've got your seedlings and your seeds, and after a couple of weeks there's going to be a little bit of continuing care. Obviously you're going to want to water. I like to water every day. The best time to water is in the early morning or after the sun has gone down in the evening or toward sunset. That way you're not losing a lot of water to evaporation, and your plants get a chance to really soak up all the water you're giving them. So water on a daily basis. You have drainage in your container, so that's another great thing. You don't really have to worry about overwatering because the water will just flow right out of the bottom of your container. In addition to watering on a daily basis, you are going to want to fertilize your plants on a monthly basis. So my favorite fertilizer is this Plant Tone organic fertilizer. This one is great. It's very gentle on your plants, but it feeds them nicely. So again, once a month, sprinkle some of this around the base of your plants before watering. It is water soluble, so after you sprinkle it on the soil, water your plants, and those nutrients will get down in there toward the root system of your plants so that it can soak that up. I just sprinkle mine fairly liberally. It's never harmed any of the leaves if it gets on there. This is safe for children and pets, and it does have very specific instructions on the bag. But like I said, I just kind of sprinkle it on there and away we go. In addition to fertilizing and watering, you'll want to protect your plants from insects that might damage it as it grows. An aphid or a whitefly infestation is not pretty, and it's going to really result in some harmed plants, maybe even dead ones. So this is a organically certified pesticide. It's a 3-in-1 actually, so it does protect your plant from several things. Go ahead and mix this in a spray bottle and use it about every 4 days on the stem and the leaves of your plants. We want to do it about every 4 days because it really interrupts the reproductive cycle of insects. So we are just keeping that population very low, at a tolerable level. So our plants are okay, and anything that's feeding on them, like ladybugs, may still be there eating. But this is going to control aphids and other soft-bodied insects. Another thing you'll want to think about with your plants is pest control, other than the insects that we mentioned, like aphids and whiteflies. So if you have deer or rabbits or other things that are going to potentially eat your plants before you get around to doing it, I would recommend simply creating a cage over your container out of chicken wire. It's very flexible, it's inexpensive, and it doesn't weigh a lot, so you can create a large sort of cover by connecting the sides and sticking it on over some stakes and keeping your container enclosed that way. If you are growing tomatoes and other larger plants and the chicken wire would be too large to create sort of a cage over your container, you can also put stakes inside your container and use bird netting or other tightly woven fabric that will still allow water and sun to get to your plant around those stakes. So you may need to do something larger in that way. Another thing is just keep your container in a space that is highly trafficked by humans. So if it's on your front porch, if that's where you get some sun, perfect. Animals are less likely to come where humans are more often. Also think about raising it up off the ground. Again, we've talked about this in the beginning, which is a good time to decide on that if you can, so that you're not lugging around containers that are now full of soil and a bit heavier. So just think about where you can place your container to reduce its chances of being exposed to animals that might want to eat those plants. The next thing we need to talk about with continued plant care is giving the plants the structure that they need to grow. So especially tomatoes and cucumbers are going to need some sort of structure so that they can be tied to it, or in the case of cucumbers, they will just grab on their own. So you can add things to the containers like just rebar poles or the covered poles they sell for tomato stakes. You could put tomato cages in them. And there is this great Velcro now tomato tie instead of that old plastic stuff. This is reusable, so it's a little bit more earth friendly, and you can just cut it to whatever size you need it and go ahead and use that to hold your plant in place.
Thank you for joining us for this tutorial on DIY vegetable container gardens. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you feel like you have skills now to easily grow food at home. This video is brought to you by Growth Through Gardening, cultivating and enriching lives through customized horticultural services and programming.